Farmers in the Midlands say they're having to deal with thousands of pounds of damage because of crop circles. The origin of the strange pattern in fields is something of a mystery, with involvement by UFOs.
In 2025, something shifted. For the first time, a powerful artificial intelligence was turned loose on decades of crop circle photos, maps and soil reports. And what it found in those fields was not chaos, but pattern. Shapes people had laughed at for years, lined up with older designs from other countries, with a precision no crew with boards and rope could plan. The data pointed to intent, and that is where this story stops being a joke and starts to feel like a message that waited for our machines to become smart enough to read it. When the fields started talking. If you follow the trail of the crop circle story back in time, you do not land in the 20th century, you land in the 17th. In 1678, a strange woodcut circulated through England. It showed a horned figure bending over a farmer's field, carving a swirling shape into the grain after the farmer refused to pay fair wages. People later called it the mowing devil. Historians see it as folklore, yet the idea under it never really went away. Long before satellites and drones, people were already imagining that something not human could press a message into the skin of the earth. For a long time, that story stayed as a curiosity in old books. Then, in the late 1970s, English farmers began waking up to find small, neat circles in their fields. At first, there were only a few each season, simple round patches of flattened crop that could be blamed on wind or on bored kids. Within a few years, the pace and the complexity began to change. By the late 1980s, formations spread across entire hillsides, filled with straight corridors, nested rings and clean geometry that looked more like someone had dropped an engineering diagram into the wheat than like a drunk prank. In 1991, a pair of retirees named Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley stepped forward and told the press they had been sneaking into fields at night with boards and string. They showed how they did it and took credit for dozens of circles. Headlines treated the case as closed, and the world relaxed. Yet their story left a gap that never really closed. Their simple methods matched the small, crude circles of the early years, but they did not explain the vast carpets of razor-sharp geometry that had begun to appear all over southern England. While the public was laughing along with Doug and Dave, a quieter investigation started. Biophysicist William Levengood and his colleagues Nancy Talbot and John Burke formed what became known as the BLT team. Instead of arguing about photographs, they went into the fields with sample bags and microscopes. They compared plants from inside formations with crops outside and saw the same thing again and again. In ordinary flattened crop, the stems were broken and kinked close to the soil. Inside many of the most intricate circles, the stems were gently curved near the base, yet remained unbroken, and the nodes along each stalk were swollen or blown open as if pressure had built up inside and burst through. Those changes could be reproduced in the lab only with short, intense bursts of microwave energy. Out in the fields, there were no burn marks, no tracks from machines, and no discarded equipment. Something was bending plants, as if from within, using energy in a way that left almost no visible trace. At the same time, the British government quietly launched Operation Blackbird, a round-the-clock surveillance effort in the heart of crop circle country, and that raises a simple but uncomfortable problem. If this was all just bored men with planks, why did the response suddenly look less like a joke and more like a military operation? Cameras, orbs, and the story that went missing. Operation Blackbird ran in the summer of 1990 in Wiltshire, one of the oldest ritual landscapes in Europe. Silbury Hill rose nearby, stone circles lined the horizon, and below them, a patchwork of fields had become a canvas for the phenomenon. Researchers such as Colin Andrews and Pat Delgado were told they would finally be able to watch a formation appear in real time. The Ministry of Defence supplied night vision, radar and long lenses, and television crews set up beside the control vans. On paper, this was the moment the mystery would stand still long enough for science to catch it. That is not how the nights played out. Despite weeks of round-the-clock surveillance, the cameras never captured men creeping through the crops with string and planks. What several operators reported instead were small glowing orbs drifting silently over the fields. Sometimes they skimmed just above the crops. Sometimes they darted and stopped in ways no normal aircraft could match. More than once, a fresh formation was discovered in the morning where lights had been moving hours earlier. The most striking sequences, according to those who saw them, showed orbs weaving above a field shortly before shapes appeared in the grain below. When Blackbird wrapped up, the official verdict was strangely flat. The public was told that nothing of significance had been recorded and that the operation was essentially a failure. The extraordinary footage spoken of by camera crews was never released. Civilian researchers who had expected full access received partial archives or none at all. Parts of the record slid into silence, and the very project that had begun as a model of transparency ended as a locked room. Years later, a documentary called Mirage Men revealed that intelligence services had long treated UFO culture as a testing ground for disinformation. Former investigators calmly described how they had fed fake documents to researchers, staged sightings, and blurred the line between experimental aircraft and tales of visitors. The aim was not to resolve mysteries, but to keep everyone guessing. In that light, Operation Blackbird starts to look less like a failed attempt to catch pranksters and more like a field exercise in narrative control. Around the same time, an art collective calling itself the Circle Makers began claiming credit for some of the most elaborate designs. Their work often appeared near the same training grounds where strange formations had been reported before. Later, rumors linked some members to people with quiet ties to intelligence circles. If those whispers have even a grain of truth, then the public face of the hoax culture was not just random mischief in fields. It was a convenient mask that could be pulled on whenever the story of the circles wandered too close to questions about advanced technology or secret programs. In a world where both anomalies and disinformation are moving through the same fields, how do you tell where the genuine mystery ends and the scripted cover story begins? When the plants became witnesses. While the noise around hoaxes and secret operations rose and fell, the one thing that did not care about opinion was the biology. Wheat and barley have no interest in publicity and no reason to exaggerate. That is what made the work of Levengood and the BLT team so unsettling. They were not chasing lights in the sky. They were looking at cells, nodes, and minerals under magnification and letting the evidence speak in the language of growth and damage. Levengood collected samples from hundreds of formations across several countries during the 1990s. In ordinary flattened crop, the kind you see after a storm, stems are kinked and broken just above the soil. Fibers tear and nodes remain normal. Inside genuine crop circles, the pattern repeated again and again in a very different way. The stems were gently curved close to the ground, yet remained unbroken. The nodes were swollen and often contained tiny ruptures, little blowouts, as if pressure had built inside the plant and released in an instant. Laboratory experiments suggested that short bursts of microwave energy could produce similar changes, softening water inside the stems so they could be bent without snapping and creating steam pressure that forced its way out through the weakest points. In the field, however, there were no scorched patches, no generators, and no tracks from heavy equipment. Whatever caused the bending and node expansion did its work with surgical control and then vanished, leaving behind designs that looked graceful from the air and forensic scars at the cellular level. The soil told its own tale. Under a microscope, researchers found countless microscopic spheres of magnetized iron embedded in the top layer inside many formations. These tiny particles were often arranged in subtle bands, as if they had settled in response to a spinning field. Samples taken just outside the designs lacked these features. To fuse material into such beads normally requires extremely high temperatures for a brief moment. Once again, the same question surfaced. Who or what was turning fields into temporary laboratories? And what kind of technology could focus that much energy without leaving obvious burns? Even the seeds seemed to respond. In controlled tests, seeds from inside certain formations germinated more quickly and produced stronger early growth than seeds from outside. The effect was not present in every circle, yet when it showed up, it was measurable. The energy that had passed through the field had left a lasting imprint on the next generation, altering growth as if someone had reached in and adjusted a dial. That is a strange side effect for what the public was told were simple nighttime pranks. For years, these findings were dismissed or ignored by mainstream institutions, yet they kept accumulating in quiet journals and internal reports. Critics argued about sample handling or selection, but rarely engaged with the most basic point. You can pay someone to pose with a plank, but you cannot easily fake consistent microscopic changes across hundreds of sites spread over continents and years. When you strip away the proven hoaxes and look only at the formations that carry clear biophysical anomalies, a smaller but far more disturbing picture remains. If the plants and the soil have been keeping an honest record all this time, what happens when a machine is finally asked to read the patterns written in the shapes themselves? The day I learned to read the fields. By the time 2025 arrived, the crop circle story felt old for most people. Believers traded photos online, skeptics rolled their eyes, and the wider world had moved on to new mysteries. What changed that year was not the phenomenon itself, but the tool pointed at it. A modern pattern-finding artificial intelligence was given everything researchers could gather from decades of investigations. Aerial photographs, ground surveys, plant studies, sketches of designs, overlays, dates and locations were all turned into data points. The instruction was simple. Do not assume anything about hoaxes or aliens. Just look for structure. The machine did what humans could not. It compared thousands of formations in fine detail across time and geography. Patterns emerged that no one had noticed. Ratios buried inside early 1990s, designs in Wiltshire reappeared in circles that formed years later in the Netherlands. Specific angular relationships in a Canadian formation matched those in shapes that appeared near an English airbase a decade earlier. To human eyes, these were separate spectacles. To the AI, they were variations on a theme. Then the Bavarian Circle of 2025 entered the analysis. At first glance, it was just another stunning modern design, a spoke-like mandala cut into golden fields. When the AI mapped its internal geometry and cross-referenced the archive, it flagged something remarkable. The Bavarian layout could be perfectly decomposed into two separate English formations from 2005. When the earlier designs were scaled and rotated, they locked into place like puzzle pieces within the newer circle. The overlaps lined up with such precision that chance arrangement could be ruled out. For this to be a harmless human joke, a group of artists would have needed to plan not for one night in one field, but for a 20-year arc across two countries. They would have had to preserve exact measurements that no one outside a small niche community ever studied, and trust that someone in the future would overlay them. The alternative is that the same unknown designer, whatever it may be, was composing across time, using fields as frames in a long, slow animation that only becomes visible when the archive is treated as one continuous canvas. The AI also uncovered another layer hidden in the images. Faint alignment lines, invisible to the naked eye, ran through many of the most complex designs. They formed construction grids and reference points that made sense from an engineering perspective, yet were not visible in any single photograph. Only when the machine enhanced and stacked shapes did those invisible skeletons stand out. It was as though the blueprint under the finished drawing had been left encoded in the way lines intersected rather than in any mark on the ground. In laboratories, new measurements from the Bavarian plants added one more detail. The stalks inside the formation were bent at a recurring angle of about 51 degrees. Samples from multiple parts of the design shared that same range. The AI confirmed that the bend angles were not random. They clustered so tightly that normal human error was essentially ruled out. When that angle was compared with certain geometric ratios inside the pattern, the numbers lined up again. At that point, the designs stopped looking like isolated works of art and began to feel more like pages from a technical manual. If an artificial intelligence can see a coherent sequence unfolding across decades, was that sequence meant for us all along? Or was it aimed at the very machines we have only recently built, training grounds for minds and narratives? The AI results forced even hardened skeptics to rethink old assumptions. If this was nothing more than human art, then the coordination behind it rivaled the most patient, long-term performance pieces in history. If it was not, then something had been laying out a puzzle across decades that quietly waited for digital eyes. Yet, there is another twist. While the shapes may have been training machines to see pattern in chaos, the wider story around them may have been training something else entirely: our collective psychology. Intelligence agencies learned long ago that the best way to control a narrative is not always to hide the truth. Sometimes it is more effective to bury a sliver of truth inside layers of noise. Crop circles provided a perfect testbed. Every summer brought new shapes. Some were clearly man-made and were even proudly advertised by the teams that built them. Others carried the deeper anomalies in plants and soil that researchers documented. Intelligence services could nudge both sides, encourage hoaxers, quietly share rumors, leak odd photos, and then watch how different groups responded. Believers were offered stunning aerial shots, stories of glowing orbs and whispers of ancient symbols. Skeptics were handed retirees with planks and carefully timed confessions. Each camp received just enough evidence to reinforce its worldview. Instead of converging on a shared investigation, the two sides argued past one another, and in that gap a more subtle experiment could unfold. The real test may have been less about what formed patterns in wheat, and more about how easily human beings could be steered into fixed opposing tribes, even when they were looking at the same raw events. When the internet arrived, this playbook scaled almost overnight. The same agencies that once used anonymous briefings and staged photos could now work through social media, comment sections, and targeted leaks. Crop circles faded from front pages just as online feeds began to fill with new mysteries, from grainy UFO clips to leaked slides on secret programs. The mechanics stayed familiar. A little real data, a little theatre, a loud confession here, a quiet correction there, all mixing into a fog where certainty is rare and outrage is constant. Seen from that angle, the crop circle era begins to look less like an isolated curiosity and more like an early chapter in the age of engineered belief. Fields in Wiltshire were the pilot study. Global news feeds became the full-scale rollout. If agencies learned that they could keep a mystery alive yet unsolved for decades by managing both the believers and the debunkers, what else might they apply that lesson to? And if formations in wheat were in part a rehearsal for a larger information war, what does that say about the puzzles we are being asked to fight over today? Who is really writing in the fields? Once the AI's findings and the biological evidence sit side by side, the old choice between hoax or aliens feels too small. People with boards and rope clearly made some formations, yet the plant changes and magnetic residues in others point to focused power we do not publicly control. One option is that hidden human technology has been tested in plain sight, using fields as temporary canvases. Directed energy or experimental craft could leave the traces researchers have recorded while hiding behind deniability, so tales about visitors become a convenient shield and anyone probing the technical side can be dismissed instead of allowed to ask why advanced projects are carving symbols into crops at night. Another option is stranger. The long-term patterning uncovered by AI may mean the true author is not a normal human agency at all. If some non-human intelligence wanted to leave a message across time and to train our tools to notice quiet signals, crop circles would be an elegant classroom. A hybrid idea sits between these, with early formations as real anomalies and later staged circles and hoaxes turning an emergent mystery into a managed belief system. The AI's real step in 2025 was to treat the whole story as one dataset. Once it did, designs from distant years began to rhyme. ratios repeated across continents, and bends in wheat-matched angles encoded in geometry. Whether that author sits in a secret lab, in something above us, or in a layer of reality we barely grasp, the effect is the same. Someone or something has been writing in fields with a patience that makes us look brief, and the fact that the message only sharpens now should make us wonder what we have just been invited to understand. Whatever you decide is behind the circles, it is hard to pretend they are only pretty shapes stamped into crops on summer nights. They carry traces of heat, magnetism, and intent, and now even machines are starting to see links that people missed for 40 years. If you want more deep dives into hidden patterns, quiet experiments, and the stories that shape how we see reality, tap like, hit subscribe, and share this video with someone who still thinks every circle in a field is just a prank. The next pattern may already be forming, and you will want to be here when we try to decode it.